Hi, everyone, and welcome to this quick workshop on note-taking presented by Tutoring Services at Concordia University, Irvine. My name is Jacob, and I work here as the Tutoring Coordinator and Success Coach. And this is part of our workshop series presented by Tutoring Services and the Writing Studio here on campus, where we talk about lots of different academic skills and writing skills with the goal of helping you become a better learner and a better writer. So we have a ton of these workshops posted to our website. We host these workshops in person on campus. We'd really encourage you to make use of these to the best of your ability because we do think that these are really helpful tools that all students can benefit from going over. And so today, like I said, we're going to be talking about note-taking, notes that work. So what makes notes effective? What makes notes ineffective? Why do we take notes? How do we take notes? All of those questions are going to be answered. But before we jump into it, I would encourage you to go grab a notebook, go on your computer and open up a document where you've taken notes before. Have an example of how you take notes in front of you so that as we go through all of this information, you can look at your notes and think how you can incorporate some of these elements into your own note-taking or how you could apply some of these ideas to your own note-taking, maybe highlight things that you're doing well, maybe highlight things that you're not doing so well right now. So you can really think about how this broad information, this general information, can be applied specifically to your situation and the classes that you might find yourself in right now or in the future. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump into it. So first off, why do notes matter? Why does taking notes matter in the first place, and why does taking good notes matter? Why should we think about this? Well, good notes, unlike poor notes or ineffective notes, good notes are an extension of your thinking. They are not just a record of what happened in class. They are not just a tool for looking over while you're studying. They are a thinking tool. And I really want you to keep that in mind as we go through this presentation, is that notes are a thinking tool. They are a tool to help you in class, outside of class, doing readings. Anytime you're taking in information, they're a tool for you to be thinking and engaging with that information so that you can critically analyze what that means, why it's important, why you should remember it, what you should remember, and how you can apply it to the problems at hand. So notes they allow you to record and synthesize and analyze new information. They can help you stay engaged. They can help you understand information. They can help you focus. They can do all of these fantastic things that are up here on the screen. But really, at the bottom line, good notes are a thinking tool for you. They're an extension of your thinking. I want you to use notes like that and think about how you take notes right now as we go through this presentation. And just remember, notes are a thinking tool. Okay, so if effective notes or good notes, right, are a thinking tool and ineffective notes are not, what separates that? What's the difference? Well, I mentioned already, but ineffective notes are just purely records of information discussed in the class. So being a record of the information is one role of note-taking. That is one reason we take notes, and I don't want to paper that over. That is a really important aspect of notes, but it is not the only reason that we take notes. It's not even the foremost reason that we take notes. This is kind of a side effect. It is important to know what happened in class and be able to look back and see a record of everything that happened in the class. But if we're not taking notes as thinking tools, we're not getting the most out of them. And secondly, ineffective notes are just tools for looking over information while studying. So a lot of people look at notes as this. They think when I'm studying, I'm going to look over my notes and I'm somehow going to read that information. It's going to move into my brain and I'm going to be able to remember that for the test. This isn't the most effective way to study, and I talk about that a lot in some of my other workshops on study skills and different study strategies. So I would encourage you to go check those out if you're interested in studying and how to study more effectively. But notes specifically are not an amazing tool for looking over information. And if we're just thinking about them as looking over that information, it can discourage us from taking notes effectively because you're going to only be thinking about what will I need to know for the test or the exam or the quiz or the project. And you're going to not write down some things that might not be directly relevant to the test in the moment, or that you don't think are going to be directly relevant to the test in the moment, but might actually be really important for you to be thinking about long term. And so, again, notes are not just tools for looking over information. They are not simply records of information discussed in class, although that is one aspect of them. They are lots of other things. So first and foremost, effective notes are intentional. So if you're taking good notes, you choose what to record and how to record it. This is the most important thing to think about as we're going through this note-taking workshop. So it is important to think critically about what you're writing down, why you're writing it down, and how you're writing it down. We really want to focus on what the most important and relevant information is. So focus on the most important main ideas, the big ideas, and frame your note-taking around those big ideas. And record examples, record supporting evidence, record counterarguments, record all of those things. If you're in a more technical class, record information based around the big ideas, the problems that you're solving, the concept that you're trying to understand. Support it with evidence, support it with details. but really, really focus on those big ideas and making sure that we're focusing on those big concepts. And lastly, good notes are organized. So notes are organized based on hierarchy and structure. It's not just stream of consciousness information that you're writing down in your notebook or that you're typing out. You're thinking about how that information fits together, how you're presenting it on the page, and how you're going to look at it down the line and make sure that you can understand how everything fits together, like you wrote it down. So before you take notes, there are a few things you can do to ensure that you are going to have a successful note-taking experience, whether it's for a class or for a reading or some other form of information that you're going to be taking notes on. So first and foremost, decide whether your notes will be handwritten or typed. There are advantages to both, but the crucial thing here is that you make an informed and critical decision about whether it's going to be handwritten or typed. So handwritten notes have a couple advantages. First and foremost, handwritten notes tend to help you actually remember the information better. You tend to retain information better if you handwrite your notes for a couple of reasons. One, you're just focusing a little bit more on the information as you're writing it down because you have to think critically about actually spelling it out and writing it down, which is actually an important step in making sure that you can remember something. Also, as you're handwriting notes, you can't typically write fast enough to be able to copy everything down verbatim that a professor says or that you see on a slide or that you see that you read out of a textbook. And so you tend to paraphrase ideas. And paraphrasing is a really important concept for being able to retain information and understand information. Because if you can paraphrase something in your own words, it means you probably have a pretty good understanding of that concept. Whereas you can parrot information or copy information, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually understand it. You can copy something and actually fall into this trap called the illusion of literacy, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But that's kind of the most important things to remember with handwritten notes. And on top of that, handwritten notes, you can also draw pictures, you can underline things, you can highlight things, you can circle things, you can draw lines between different ideas, you can do all of these things. It's a little bit more freeform when you're handwriting. And if you have an iPad, it's even a little bit more helpful because you can erase things and move things around and do all, zoom out and zoom in really close and do all of these things, and it can be really freeform, which is really helpful. Disadvantages of handwritten notes, you can't share them with other people as easily. You can't really take notes collaboratively if you're handwriting them. You have to look through everything. If you have a really long notebook with lots of information, you have to look through by hand. You can't just hit Control F and search something in your notes. And you can't move anything around once it's down unless you erase it. If you've written something down in pen or marker, it's there and you can't move it. So those are the disadvantages. Typed notes, on the other hand, you can take down a lot more information. You can type things out a lot faster, like I talked about, than handwritten notes. You can share them really easily. It's really easy to do collaborative notes if you're writing them out, if you're typing them out. And typed notes have another advantage, which is it's really easy to organize information. You can move blocks around. You can move big blocks of text around. You can change organization systems really easily if you're typing notes. It's very fluid if you're typing it out on a computer, whereas if you're handwriting them, not so fluid, especially if it's on a physical notebook. So there's just a few things to think about as you're handwriting and typing notes. Also, if you're typing notes, one last thing, if you're typing notes on a computer, it can be a little bit easier to get distracted by something on the internet or something else that you're working on. Whereas if you have a notebook, you're really just focusing on the class and on the notebook. So that's one other thing. If you know that you're susceptible to digital distraction, might be helpful to think about when you're thinking about whether to take handwritten or typed notes. So that's step one. I know I talked a lot about that step, but it is an important one. And I want you to think critically about it. Step two is to have a note-taking system in place. So we're going to talk about a few different note-taking systems later on in this presentation. But the most important thing to note when you're thinking about your note-taking system is that this is something that should be specific to you. Find the system that works best for you and apply that to the classes that you're in. This is, don't take one that the internet says is the best, or that your friend says is the best, or that I say is the best. Think about how you can specifically apply one system or several systems and make sure that you understand how it can fit for your specific situation. So have a system in place. And then before you take notes, record some basic info. So the class, the day, the time, and then lastly, preview the information for the class. So if you spend 5 or 10 minutes before a class looking over the concepts that you're going to be going through, it can be really helpful because you know where the class is going and you're not hearing everything for the first time fresh. You actually have an idea of what the big concepts are. And that can help you organize your notes, can give you a little bit of structure, a little bit of hierarchy, which is really helpful when we're thinking about taking notes. So these are just some steps before you take notes that are important to keep in mind. So decide if you're going to handwrite or type them, decide what your system's going to look like, record some basic info, and then preview the information for the class. And if you do this regularly, it becomes kind of second nature to you, and you won't really have to think about it. But this can be really helpful before you get into class, just to be able to engage with the class. And like I said, note-taking is at its heart a learning tool, and these steps are going to help you be able to engage in class just that little bit more effectively. So, class has started. You have your notebook or your computer. You have your system that you're going to use. You've recorded some basic info. You've previewed the information. What do you do now? Well, first and foremost, not foremost, I shouldn't say that. First, and I say this in lots of different presentations, but minimize distraction. You need to be able to focus and pay attention to the task at hand to be able to do it to the best of your ability. So avoid multitasking. Make sure that you're not working on another assignment or looking at something online. It's really difficult to split your attention between two different tasks and actually remain substantively engaged in either one of those two tasks, or more than that. So we really want to focus on just the task at hand and turn off those notifications. So if your phone buzzes and you get a text, or it pops up on your computer, or you get an email on your computer, it can really easily pull you out of your focus and disrupt your attention. And so turn off those notifications ahead of time just to avoid any of those distractors. You're in class, you're going to learn most effectively if you can focus in class, and so you want to set yourself up for success. And you can do this outside of the class as well. If you're reading or if you're engaging with some sort of class material, set up your environment, think critically about the environment that you're working in. Put your phone away, try and find a relatively quiet place to work, or put headphones in so that you can really focus. And make sure that you set up your environment in a way that is conducive to your note-taking and your focus. So you're in a good situation, you've minimized your distractions, you like your environment. What do you do now? 3 steps. 1, listen critically. 2, think while you write. And 3, write economically. And then do it again. So listen critically. The whole point of this, the whole point of taking notes, is that you are taking the information that you hear, the information that you read, and you are thinking about it. You're processing it. You're thinking, this is the important bits, these are the unimportant bits, this is how everything fits together, and here's how I'm going to write it down so that I can remember that later, so that I can look over it later, and so that I can actually think about this as we're going through the class. So first, listen critically. But what does that mean? So first, differentiate. Professors are going to include lots of different types of information in their lectures. So big main ideas, examples of those ideas, evidence for those ideas, conclusions, questions about those ideas, counterarguments, wild tangents, all sorts of different things that your professors are going to tell you. And so it's really important to learn to differentiate between those different types of information. Learn to figure out when they're introducing a big concept that you should write down and that you should focus on. Learn when they're just talking about some evidence that supports that concept. If you're in a more technical class, like an engineering class or a math class, learn to recognize when they're talking about a key concept that really frames a conversation or frames a type of problem solving that you need to be able to do, so that you can, when you hear those big ideas, you can write them down and really frame your notes around those big ideas. One way you can do that is to listen for verbal signposts. So oftentimes speakers or books will signal important information through phrases or nonverbal cues. Obviously books don't do it through nonverbal cues, but professors, they might stop, they might say this is really important. They might say, in conclusion, they might say, write this down, or remember this, or the big idea here is, right? You want to listen for those verbal signposts to pick out the important bits of information. It can also be helpful to engage in class discussions. So if your class is small enough that you're able to do a discussion, it can be really helpful because it helps you to stay engaged in the class and helps you to assess your own learning. If you're participating and offering something up in a class discussion, you probably have to think pretty critically about what you're going to say. And so engaging in those discussions can actually help you figure out what the most important things to write down in your notes is. And then last but not least, cite your sources. So oftentimes if a professor gives you a piece of information and they say, there's this person or this idea, or this came from this person, write that person down, write the source down. If they say this came from a book, or this came from a movie, or this came from an article, cite that source, because it can be just as important as the piece of information itself. Okay, so that's it. Listen critically. Then, think while you write. So you've listened to what the professor has to say and you start writing stuff down. What are we writing down? Well, think critically about it. So first, focus on big concepts. So I talked about this already, but I've talked about it a couple times, but focus on those big concepts because we want to look out for those central questions and ideas. It's going to help you stay engaged. It's going to help you keep your notes focused and concise if you really are able to frame those notes just around the big ideas. It's going to help you be able to recognize this is why this class or this lecture, this reading is important. It's because we're trying to really drill into this specific concept or into this specific idea. So we want to think about that as we're taking our notes. Second, paraphrase. Do not record information verbatim, unless it's obviously a formula or something like that. But in any other time, try to avoid just copying down information. Restating information in your own words is a really helpful way of ensuring that you can actually fully understand it. Whereas if you copy something down, it actually encourages something called the illusion of literacy, which I talked about earlier, which is basically that if you read something that makes sense, you might trick yourself into thinking that you have learned it, whereas you might just be able to correctly interpret it if it's phrased in a very logical way, right? Whereas if you paraphrase that same thing, you'll actually force yourself to make sure that you actually understand that information. So try to avoid copying information, paraphrase. And then lastly, elaborate. So always be asking questions of the information that's given to you. Why is this important? Why should I care about this? How does this relate to other things that we've talked about? How can I apply this to this problem or this problem or this problem? Always be asking questions about the information so that you can make sure that you understand it as deeply as possible. Try to come up with concrete examples of vague ideas and concepts. So if you are talking through a problem, a way to solve a problem, try and write down a concrete example of how that looks so that you can see how to apply the idea to a practical situation. And use visual cues as you're writing. So if you write down a big idea, you circle it, underline it, highlight it, something. If you have a question about something, use a question mark. One of the big advantages of note taking is that you can change how you take your notes based on the information that you're looking out for. So use those visual cues so that if you are going back over your notes later, or you want to remember something really important, you can circle it, or you can do something to tell your brain, to trick your brain into remembering that thing. So use visual cues. And then write economically. Once you've decided what you're going to write down, be concise. Don't over-explain concepts in your notes. Being concise can help you focus. Make sure that you're only recording the most important things. Use abbreviations. So if there's long words or ideas that you're trying to compress into a small space, try and use abbreviations. Even swapping and for an ampersand or a plus can be helpful. Swapping therefore for those 3 dots can be helpful. Swapping with for a W and a slash can be helpful. These little things can really help you write as quickly and economically as possible so that you can stay engaged in the lecture. And then lastly, use visuals to explain ideas. So pictures can often be a really, really clear way of explaining a complex idea that might be difficult to understand if you write it out. But if you draw a diagram or you draw a picture, or you draw a map of it, it's actually much easier to understand. So don't be afraid of drawing in your notes. It can be a really helpful way of being able to understand information. Then once you've done that, go back to listening critically. The whole purpose of this is to be able to help you engage in class, or to engage in the reading, or to engage in whatever type of information you're taking in. So we want to be able to listen, identify important information, write it down in our notes in a logical way as quickly as possible, and then go back to listening. Go back to engaging in the class. And that's kind of the system that we're trying to work with here. Is listen critically, think while you write economically, listen critically, think while you write economically, listen critically. That's the cycle we're trying to get into. So that's a good way to think about taking notes. What about after you take notes? So the class is over, or you're moving on from the lecture portion of the class, or you finish the reading. What should you do? What should you do now? Should you do anything now? Should you just close the notebook? Well, you can. It's up to you. But I think it can be helpful just to spend 3 to 5 minutes doing a few things that are going to help you make sure that you truly did understand everything, wrap up any questions that you might have had, and give you a good launch pad for studying in the future. So after you take your notes, organize the information you just collected. Chunk those notes into main ideas like we talked about to improve your retention and understanding, and to be able to assist with review. Because if you chunk information in your notes, you can look back at it and say, oh, all of this section applies to this concept. I already know that. I don't have to figure it out. And you can do this in lots of different ways. Do it in a way that makes sense to your brain. So organize that information. Then elaborate. So you can do this while you're taking notes, but it can also be a good step to do after you take notes. So expand on any examples or definitions that you wrote down, answer any questions you still have, fill in any details that you missed. this is a really good chance for you. If you did have to move quickly past something, you can always go back and fill it in as long as you gave yourself the proper cues to remember what you needed to go back for. And then third, summarize. So paraphrase the main ideas of the lecture into your own words. This will force you to assess the content of the lecture, provide a useful summation for review, and really test yourself to see if you have anything that you didn't understand, any questions that you might have had. You're going to bring up if you try and summarize the lecture and you figure out, oh, I didn't really understand this concept, or I don't remember what the professor said about this, or I don't remember how these two ideas fit together. Again, this is doing the paraphrase as you take notes. This is just doing it writ large. So taking all of the information that you took in and just trying to summarize it in a short couple sentences or a paragraph and seeing if you're able to do that. So that's kind of what the system looks like. So before you take your notes, decide if you're going to do them handwritten or typed. Record some basic info, have a system, and preview that information. While you're taking those notes, minimize your distractions, listen critically, think while you write, and write economically, and then do it all again. And then after, organize your information, elaborate on your information, and summarize that information. So this is the system. I hope this is helpful for you. The purpose of this, really, like I said, there's no one right way to do this. I want you to take these ideas and be able to apply it to how you like to take notes or the classes that you're in. See if you can apply, these big concepts to how you've already taken notes. See if you really are listening critically while you're taking notes. See if you can shorten how you write economically. See, did I organize my information? Did I elaborate on these ideas? Did I summarize information as I was going through my notes? And there's no one right way to do that. There's lots of different ways to do that. But the point is that, like I said, we're using notes as a learning tool. And these are some methods. There are other methods, but these are some methods to make sure that you are using notes as a learning tool so that you can really engage with the information during class and during your readings, and that you can use these notes later on as helpful study tools. Okay, so let's have an exercise. So I'm going to put up a few note-taking styles on the screen. As we're going through this, I'd like you to know what you like about the system, what seems intuitive to you, and what seems unintuitive to you, and how you could adapt one or more of these systems to suit your needs. So, quick disclaimer, I am not recommending that you try one of these. I'm not recommending that you try any of these. You could try multiple of these if you like. You could incorporate multiple of these styles into your own note-taking. The purpose of this is to give you a few examples of how your notes might look, and to see what you like about it, what you don't like about it, and how you can improve upon your own note-taking looking at these examples. So, first, super basic, outlining. So the pros of outlining are that there's a very clear hierarchy. It's really easy to review, and it's very straightforward. So outlining is probably the most common form of note-taking. This is pretty much how most people take notes in one way or another. So you can see the structure here on the screen, but you have a heading, you have a subheading, or this can be an idea and a sub-idea, and then some examples or some evidence or some information about that idea, some context. And you just have this very logical structure where you have everything laid out on the page right in front of you. This is a really common way of taking notes. This is a very logical way of taking notes. It's a very simple way of taking notes. And all these things are really, really helpful because, like we said, it's really important to organize your information hierarchically, being able to figure out this is a heading, this is a subheading, this is a main idea, this is a piece of evidence for that main idea, this is a counter argument to that idea. And this can help you visually highlight all of that as you are taking notes. However, some potential disadvantages to this, it's not the most flexible system in the world. You can get kind of off track. It's hard to maybe connect ideas early on in the lecture to ideas later on in the lecture. So there are some cons to this, but this can be a really helpful way of taking notes and just a starting point really for taking notes. So next, we have a system called Cornell Notes. So you might have heard of this before. You might never have heard of this before. I know a lot of people were maybe forced to do this when they were in high school, and they have some pretty negative associations with that. If that was you, again, I'm not telling you that you should do it. You have to do notes like this, but this can be a really effective way of taking notes, and because it gives us that macro structure for the notes. So on the left side, in that little box where it says Q, the cues for Cornell Notes can be questions, they can be concepts, they can be main ideas. The purpose here is you have a dedicated section where you can highlight, this is the main idea of the question that is related to the details that I'm taking down on the right side of the page. And then on the right side of the page, you have the notes. So you can do this, and you can still use an outlining structure here for the notes. You can use paragraph structure for these notes. You can use mapping for these notes, like mind mapping for these notes. You can do this in a lot of different ways. The purpose is not that you do it in a very specific and clean way. The purpose is that you follow the macro structure to be able to understand how everything fits together. And at the bottom of the notes, not necessarily every page, but maybe every section or every class session, you have a summary. And like I talked about, summarizing is a really important step. As we're taking notes, be able to make sure that you understand what you wrote down and that you're able to say it in your own words. So some pros of this: it's organized macro structure, which is really helpful for you. It's very adaptable. You can use this for lots of different types of notes. It's a very consistent system that you can use. And it's super helpful for review because you have those cues or those questions or those main ideas, and you can just start using those as kind of review prompts for yourself. And you have that summary at the bottom, which you can go over, and it's kind of laid out in a way that makes it really logical to review. So this is a really helpful system. However, some people do find it constraining. They might find it not super logical to follow this structure for all of their classes. They might not like setting those cues on this side. They might prefer more traditional headings. There can be things that are not as helpful about this system of notes, but it can be a very helpful way of thinking about that. Like I talked about, that macro structure, that macro organization, thinking about the big picture of your notes, and then adapting the specifics of the notes to be able to represent the information in the most logical way. So that's Cornell notes. Mapping or mind mapping. So the pros here are that you can visually show relationships and structure. It's super helpful for review, and it's very, very flexible. So, but one of the big cons here is it's really difficult to do this in real time if you don't know what's coming next. So I would encourage you to maybe incorporate this idea as a review or as your summary at the end of a note-taking session, or as one component of a note-taking system. But this system can be really helpful because you can visually show those relationships. You can really highlight, this is the main idea. This is the thing that everything else gravitates around. This is the thing that everything else is orbiting around. And then you can show those how it branches out to subpoints, and how those subpoints have their evidence, their counter arguments, and all of those different small pieces of information, and how you can see how that all fits together to create the main idea, the main concept. So like I said, this can be a really helpful way of organizing information. It can be really difficult to do this in real time. So this is mapping. This is another way of taking notes. And then last but not least, you have the QEC/PSA system. So it stands for Question, Evidence, Conclusion, or Problem, Steps, Answer system. So this is just another way of structuring your notes on a macro level. So, the big major organization of the paper, of your notes. And so if you're using the QEC method, which is probably more relevant for discussion classes or humanities classes, where you're starting with a concept or a question or an idea, and then you go through that question and you lay out, this is the evidence for it, this is the evidence against it. And then at the bottom, you say, this is my conclusion about this question, right? And then if you're in a more technical class, just replace question with problem. So this is the problem that we're trying to solve. These are the steps to solve it, and here's my answer. And you can use this for both humanities for both discussion-based classes and more technical classes, which is something that I think is really good about it. It does have that consistent structure, so you always know how your notes are going to be structured and what you need to do. And it's very inherently analytical. You're not just putting down information on the page to have it sit there and do nothing. You are putting down information on the page with a purpose, trying to answer the question or trying to answer the problem. That's a really helpful thing if you are trying to be very analytical as you're taking your notes. So this is another note-taking system that can be helpful. Some students really like it. Some students don't love the very rigid structure that you have to follow. And that's a very valid criticism of this system. But again, the purpose of this is for you to see some different systems, see how people organize their notes, and figure out what could work in your own situation. So the four that we laid out, once again, are outlining. Very simple, very straightforward, which is typically a really good place to start. Cornell notes, which has that really helpful macro structure where you have the cues and the notes and the summary at the end of the page, and take some of those ideas that we were talking about earlier in the presentation and just incorporates them into the note-taking system itself. We have mapping, which can be a great tool for review, can be a great tool for visually showing relationships, but it might be a little bit more difficult to do in real time if you are in a lecture or reading something. And then we have QEC/BSA, which again provides that really helpful rigid structure. You always know exactly where the information should go, but not the most flexible thing in the world. And so these are all different systems. There's other systems out there that you can try out. But again, the purpose of this is that you look at these 4 systems, figure out things that you like about them, figure out things that you don't like about them, what you can incorporate into your own notes, and be able to hopefully think critically about how you're taking information from the outside world, from a professor, from a book, from a presentation, and bringing it into your own notebook and thinking through it critically. So I want to thank you for sitting through this presentation. I do very much hope that this was helpful for you. The purpose of these is to be as helpful for you guys as possible. And so we have, like I mentioned, this is just one of our many workshops where we talk about different writing skills, we talk about different academic skills. And if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to contact us or stop by the Writing Center and the Tutoring Center here on campus. So just want to thank you again and hope you have a great rest of your day.